I still shudder at the thought of what I saw that night. It was a few years ago, but the memory is still vivid in my mind. I was out camping alone in the woods, deep in the heart of the Canadian wilderness. I had been looking forward to this trip for months, and I was excited to spend a few days in nature, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The first night was peaceful, and I slept soundly in my tent. But on the second night, things started to feel off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something felt wrong. I brushed it off as nerves, and tried to go back to sleep. That's when I heard it. A low growl, coming from outside my tent. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself that it was just a bear, but deep down, I knew it was something far more sinister. I cautiously unzipped the tent flap, peering out into the darkness. That's when I saw it. A tall, emaciated figure, with antlers protruding from its head. It was a wendigo, the stuff of nightmares. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey me. The wendigo was upon me in seconds, its breath hot on my neck. I thought I was done for, that I was going to be the next victim of this creature's insatiable hunger. But then, something strange happened. The wendigo spoke. Its voice was deep and raspy, like it hadn't spoken in centuries. "You are not what I seek," it said. "Leave this place, and do not return." I didn't need to be told twice. I gathered my things as quickly as I could, and fled the woods. I didn't stop running until I was back in civilization. I know what I saw that night. And I know that it was real. Wendigos are not something to be trifled with, and I count myself lucky to have escaped with my life. I still get chills down my spine when I think about the night I encountered a skinwalker. It was a few years ago when I was camping with my friends in the woods. We had set up our tents and started a fire. It was a beautiful night, and we were having a great time drinking and roasting marshmallows. But as the night went on, things started to get strange. We heard strange noises coming from the woods, and the fire seemed to dim on its own. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I saw something moving in the darkness. At first, I thought it was a deer or a coyote, but as it got closer, I realized it was something else entirely. It was a figure, hunched over and walking on all fours. Its body was covered in fur, and its eyes were glowing in the darkness. I froze in terror as the creature made its way towards us. My friends were too drunk to notice what was happening, but I knew we were in danger. I tried to warn them, but they just laughed it off. As the creature got closer, I realized what it was, a skinwalker. I had heard stories about these creatures before, but I never believed they were real until that night. I knew we had to leave, but the skinwalker was blocking our only path back to the car. We were trapped, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I didn't know what to do. But then, something strange happened. The skinwalker stopped in its tracks and seemed to stare directly at me. I felt a surge of fear, but then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. We packed up our things and left the campsite that night, never to return. I still have nightmares about that encounter, and I know that I was lucky to make it out alive. But I'll never forget the feeling of being stalked by a skinwalker in the woods, and I'll always be wary of what lurks in the darkness. I'm not sure if what I saw was real, but it's been haunting me for weeks. I was hiking in a remote area of the woods, trying to escape the stress of my daily life. The sun was starting to set, and I knew I had to start heading back before it got too dark. As I made my way back, I heard strange noises coming from the trees around me. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard what sounded like footsteps. I stopped dead in my tracks and listened. The footsteps were getting closer. That's when I saw it. A figure emerged from the trees, about 50 yards away. It was tall and thin, with a single eye in the middle of its head. Its skin was pale and stretched tightly over its bones. It looked like a cross between a skinwalker and a wendigo, but I knew that wasn't quite right. It was a gigopler. I froze. I had heard stories about gigoplers, but I never thought I would encounter one. I knew they were dangerous, so I slowly started to back away. But the gigopler started to move towards me, its single eye fixed on me. I knew I had to run. I turned and sprinted as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the gigopler behind me, its footsteps thundering on the forest floor. I didn't dare look back. I don't know how long I ran for, but eventually, I stumbled upon a clearing. I looked back, but the gigopler was nowhere to be seen. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't run into that clearing. I shudder to think about it. I don't know if I'll ever go hiking in those woods again, but one thing's for sure, I'll never forget that gigopler sighting. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the Wendigo, but let me tell you, it's not something you want to encounter. It was a few years ago when I had my own experience with this terrifying creature. I was on a camping trip with a group of friends in the deep woods of Canada. We had been hiking for most of the day and decided to set up camp near a river that was known for its excellent fishing. We had a great day fishing and roasting marshmallows around the campfire, and everything seemed perfect until the night fell. I was in my tent, trying to get some sleep when I heard something moving outside. At first, I thought it was just one of my friends, but the sounds were too loud and too strange. I heard footsteps crunching through the leaves and twigs, and there was a low growl coming from outside. Suddenly, I heard something scratching at my tent, and I froze. I held my breath, hoping it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again, and this time it was louder. I was too scared to move, and I just lay there, listening to the creature that was now circling my tent. Its heavy footsteps sent shivers down my spine, and its breathing was so heavy that I could hear it through the thin walls of my tent. I was paralyzed with fear, and I knew that I had to do something to get out of there. I slowly unzipped the door of my tent and peeked out, and that's when I saw it. It was standing there, just a few feet away from me, staring right at me with its glowing eyes. The creature was tall and thin, with long arms and legs, and it looked like it had been starving for weeks. Its skin was gray and scaly, and its breath smelled like death. It was a Wendigo, and I knew that I was in grave danger. I didn't know what to do, and I thought that I was going to die. But then, something strange happened. The creature just stood there, watching me, and then it slowly turned around and disappeared into the woods. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and I told my friends about the encounter in the morning. They thought that I was just making it up, but I knew what I had seen. I still get chills thinking about that night and how close I came to becoming a victim of the Wendigo. I'll never forget that experience, and I'll never underestimate the power of the supernatural again. I grew up on a Navajo reservation in the Southwest, where stories of skinwalkers were as common as the desert heat. For those who don't know, a skinwalker is a type of witch who can transform into animals or other people. They're said to be able to run incredibly fast, and they prey on unsuspecting travelers. Most people dismiss the stories as superstition, but I always believed there was some truth to them. One summer when I was in my early 20s, I decided to take a solo camping trip deep into the desert. I had all the gear I needed, and I was looking forward to getting away from the reservation for a while. I drove out into the wilderness and found a secluded spot to set up camp. It was a beautiful spot, surrounded by red rocks and towering mesas. I felt at peace, at least until nightfall. I was sitting by my campfire, cooking some dinner, when I heard a strange noise in the distance. It sounded like an animal, but it was too deep and guttural to be any creature I knew. I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably just a coyote or something. But then I heard it again, closer this time. And then again, even closer. I started to feel uneasy. I decided to pack up my dinner and head into my tent for the night. As I lay there trying to fall asleep, I heard the noise again, this time right outside my tent. It was so close that I could hear its breathing. I froze, too scared to even move. I knew I wasn't alone out there. Then I heard something scratching at the side of my tent, like a clawed hand trying to get in. I could feel the fabric stretching and tearing under the pressure. That's when I heard it speak. It spoke in Navajo, but I could understand it perfectly. It said, "Come outside. I want to show you something." I knew then that it was a skinwalker. I tried to stay as still and quiet as possible, hoping it would go away. But it just kept scratching and whispering. It taunted me, saying it could hear my heart beating faster and faster. I was terrified. I don't know how long it went on for, but eventually, the scratching stopped, and the skinwalker left. I didn't dare leave my tent until morning, but when I did, I saw that there were deep claw marks all around it. I knew I had been lucky to escape with my life. To this day, I don't know why the skinwalker didn't attack me. Maybe it was just toying with me, or maybe it was waiting for me to come outside. But I do know that I'll never forget that night. And I'll never go camping alone again. I've always been fascinated with cryptids and urban legends. So, when I heard about the Gigopler sighting in a nearby forest, I couldn't resist the urge to investigate. It was a chilly autumn night when I set out on my quest. Armed with only a flashlight and a camera, I made my way to the forest. As I got deeper into the woods, the trees became thicker, and the night grew darker. I soon realized I had lost my bearings, and I couldn't tell which direction I was heading. But I wasn't alone. I could feel something watching me, lurking in the shadows. My instincts told me to turn back, but I had come this far, and I wasn't going to give up that easily. So, I continued on, deeper into the woods. That's when I saw it. A tall, slender figure with one glowing eye, standing in the distance. At first, I thought it was a person, but the closer I got, the more I realized that it was something else entirely. I froze in terror as the Gigopler started to move towards me, its step slow and deliberate. It let out a bone-chilling screech that echoed throughout the forest. I couldn't move, and I couldn't scream. I was paralyzed with fear. But just as I thought my fate was sealed, the Gigopler suddenly stopped in its tracks. It tilted its head and stared at me, as if studying me. For what felt like an eternity, the Gigopler and I stood there, locked in a stare down. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the Gigopler turned and vanished into the forest. I stumbled back, gasping for air. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I knew I had to get out of the woods before something else happened. I made it out of the forest alive, but I never forgot that night. To this day, I still can't explain what happened or why the Gigopler spared me. But one thing's for sure, I'll never go looking for cryptids again. I live in a small town nestled in the heart of the Canadian wilderness. I've always loved the peace and quiet of living here, but there are some things you can't escape, no matter how remote your location. One night, I was driving home from work along the deserted back roads that wind through the forests and hills around my town. The sun had set an hour earlier, and the sky was pitch black. I was tired, and my eyes were heavy, so I was looking forward to getting home and getting some rest. That's when I saw it. It was standing at the edge of the road, just beyond the reach of my headlights. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe a bear, but as I got closer, I realized it was something much more terrifying. It was a Wendigo. I'd heard stories of the Wendigo before, but I never believed them. I thought they were just old legends, passed down by the First Nations people who lived in these parts long before us. But there it was, standing right in front of me. I slammed on the brakes, bringing my car to a screeching halt. The Wendigo turned its head slowly, and our eyes met. I can still remember the feeling of cold dread that washed over me at that moment. It was tall, impossibly tall, with antlers that reached up to the treetops. Its skin was gray and mottled, like the bark of a dead tree, and its eyes were deep, empty pools of blackness. I sat there frozen, watching as the Wendigo started to move towards me, its long, bony fingers clicking together in the darkness. I could hear its breath, ragged and rasping, like the sound of wind blowing through a deserted graveyard. I don't know how long we sat there, locked in that silent, terrifying stare down. But eventually, the Wendigo turned and disappeared back into the forest, its antlers vanishing among the trees. I sat there for a few more minutes, trying to calm my racing heart, before I finally drove home, shaking with fear. I've never seen the Wendigo again, but I know it's still out there, watching and waiting. Sometimes I hear its mournful cries echoing through the trees at night, and I know that I'm lucky to have survived that first encounter. Now, whenever I'm driving along those dark, deserted back roads, I keep my eyes peeled for any sign of movement in the trees. I never want to meet the Wendigo again, but I know that if I do, I'll be ready. I was driving alone on a deserted road late one night when I saw something that still haunts me to this day. It was a dark figure lurking by the side of the road, and as I got closer, it became clear that it wasn't human. The figure seemed to be some sort of creature, with matted fur and glowing eyes. It was too large to be a normal animal, and too humanoid to be anything else. I slowed down, hoping that I was just seeing things, but as I got closer, the creature turned to face me. That's when I saw its face, twisted and distorted in a way that made my skin crawl. It was like something out of a horror movie, with a mouth that seemed to stretch from ear to ear, and teeth that glinted in the moonlight. I felt a wave of fear wash over me as the creature stepped out onto the road, blocking my path. I knew then that I had encountered a skinwalker, a creature from Native American folklore that can take on the form of any animal it chooses. They're said to be powerful, malevolent beings that can possess humans and cause chaos and destruction. I tried to back up, but the creature was too fast, and it began to advance towards me. I could feel its eyes boring into me, and I knew that it was sizing me up, deciding whether or not to attack. Just when I thought it was all over, something unexpected happened. The creature suddenly turned and ran off into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I sat there in my car for a moment, trying to catch my breath, before finally driving away as fast as I could. I don't know what saved me that night, whether it was luck or something else, but I'm grateful to be alive. I still think about that skinwalker from time to time, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't gotten away. It's a reminder that there are things out there in the world that we can't explain, and that we should always be careful when traveling alone at night. I never thought I would have my own encounter with a gigopler. I had heard stories about them growing up, but always thought they were just another legend people used to scare each other. That was until last summer. I was on a camping trip with a few friends, deep in the woods. We had been hiking all day and decided to set up camp near a river we stumbled upon. It was a beautiful spot and we were all excited to spend the night there. As the sun started to set, we started a fire and cracked open some beers. We were having a great time, telling stories and roasting marshmallows. It wasn't until later in the night, when we heard strange noises coming from the woods, that things started to feel off. At first, we thought it was just an animal. But as the sounds got closer and more intense, we knew it was something else. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew we needed to be careful. That's when we saw it. A massive figure with one glowing eye emerged from the trees. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was bipedal and covered in matted hair, with razor-sharp teeth and claws. I could feel the fear creeping up inside me, and I knew we were in danger. We all froze, unsure of what to do. But then, it lunged at us. I don't remember much after that. All I know is that we ran as fast as we could, trying to get as far away from that thing as possible. We made it back to our car, shaken and scared. We never talked about that night again. But I know what I saw. I saw a gigopler, and it was the scariest thing I have ever experienced. I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't been able to get away. But I do know that I never want to encounter one of those things again.